Welcome to another edition of A Deeper Look. I am joined by my partners in crime, Egberto Willies and Joel Seagull. It was a sight that has never been seen in American history, a scene more suited for a superhero movie using the Capitol as a backdrop. Unfortunately,
Come out.
I should get rid of that.
No, what we got to do is we got to figure out a way for Karen to be able to read and then look directly into the picture. So if we can figure that out, we're good.
There are programs to do that teleprompter where you can bring your text into it.
I know, yeah, it's hard to do without like the professional.
Oh, you know what? I might wait.
There's
When I put this, I might be able to put this on the computer that's behind me. Let's see.
Okay.
Let's see if I can.
Oh boy.
Hey, what do you think about us winning Georgia, man?
I didn't expect it. I've been on the phone with the executive director of the Atlanta PD of the NAACP, and we're going to move forward on what I'll talk about a little bit today. But I didn't expect it. I went to bed at 11 o'clock, and the Republicans were winning. I woke up at 5, and we were winning. So it was.
I'm going to call you lazy, man. I waited till those numbers changed. I looked at those numbers and I said, even I told my daughter we're gonna win. She said, "Dad, don't jinx it." I'm saying, "No, baby, we win in this one," because when I saw Atlanta, man, I'm like, we got this baby. We got this baby.
What they're saying is that it was the black rural vote that made the difference.
Yeah, I believe that.
Towns, they made the Republican big smaller. They made those big Republican counties smaller with the vote that they brought. You see, Stacey Abrams is smart. She went, what the Democratic Party does, they always go to the big cities and they try to do everything with one swoop, and they hire all these consultants that know absolutely nothing. Stacey Abrams went and got folks like Greg Palast, who did some legal work and investigative. In fact, I had Greg Palast on 2 times last week. And they
good guy.
Yeah, I love Greg. We worked together on a few things. So I mean, in fact, I tweeted his stuff today. He have a new thing out. He found one of the guys who were out there in DC was one of the guys who he kind of fingered in Atlanta. Same guy from the Republican Party.
Well, I think so. The NAACP had 19 counties. They had organization, and Monday at 5, you guys should be on the Zoom call because he's going to explain on this national coalition what I want to know. What's the Georgia miracle? What did they do? And examine it. And we're going to do a town hall at George Mason because if we can replicate what they did in Georgia and all these swing states, we could win indefinitely.
We could win the South.
We could win the South because that formula that they did in Georgia, it was unions, NAACP, Stacey Abrams, was so many different groups. But for a Jewish guy that's 32 to win the Senate, a Jewish guy and a black reverend.
Yeah, I know.
No, but it's not only that he's a Jewish guy, he's young. In fact, I think the only reason he underperformed Warnock, people were putting in the woman's card in there. I don't know if this one was a woman's card. I think this was an age card. I think it's because he was young and,
32.
Right. He's very young senator. So you ready, Karen?
I am.
Let's rock it.
Hello and welcome to A Deeper Look. I have my cohorts in crime with me, Egberto Willies and Joel Seagull. It was a sight that has never been seen in American history, a scene more suited for a movie. Unfortunately, this was no film. Trump supporters scaled the lower walls of the Capitol building and then used ropes to hoist themselves up to the dome, which has stood as an international symbol of American democracy for nearly 200 years. The same president that stood on the west front of the US Capitol nearly 4 years ago and told the American people that he would make loyalty to the country the bedrock of his politics, now urged his supporters to take to the streets of the Capitol to stop the election from being stolen by the radical left. Never mind that the president has lost 60 appeals and numerous recounts in his determination to remain in power. So on Wednesday night, the president of law and order directed his foot soldiers to attack the very principles of democracy and wage war in the streets of the Capitol. Trump followers seized the Capitol and forced their ways into the offices of both the House and the Senate, forcing law enforcement to spirit away lawmakers to an undisclosed location. The Trump supporters broke into the Speaker's office and made themselves at home on the Senate floor with very little resistance from the few law enforcement officials on the scene. Why were there so few officers present when Trump had been calling for his supporters to make a stand against the certification of the vote in Congress for weeks? The National Guard and a still undetermined military force lined the streets in Washington last summer during the Black Lives demonstrations. And in June of 2017, disabled protesters whose only crime was protesting the proposed elimination of the health care benefits that keep many of them alive were dragged from their wheelchairs and forcibly removed. So why were these thugs, many of whom were elected officials from outside Washington, D.C., allowed to run amok while taking selfies of the carnage they left behind?
I don't know why, but I tell you one thing. I'm going to. There's an interesting thing, Karen and Joel, that got to me, and I'm going to say it this way. This one has nothing to do with the actual insurrection. It had to do for me with that these people were fearless against armed police officers. Somebody like myself, when I see a police officer, armed or not, there's always a lump in my throat. I am a professional. I've been in this country a very long time. And if there's a cop behind me, but there's a cop in front of me, not even to speak about at a rally, I stay away from cops. I found it, I think it showed a microcosm of America in that you saw right away that different people have different views of law and authority. Law and authority. And I think, people were concerned about how could this happen? We all knew, like you said, Karen, this was all over the internet. We knew this was coming. We just thought that if these people were met with the presence of an officer, that somehow they would react differently, and they didn't. And as you said in your piece, it just shows that in this country, the value of your life is gradated by melanin and other issues.
I agree. I totally agree. It was almost as if they knew they weren't going to get a lot of pushback.
Yeah. I think, and I don't think it was they knew they weren't going to get a pushback. And I think if you take a look at society at large, I think that's generally how it works. So what I thought that showed is while that was an insurrection that the police there should have handled, the daily insurrection that happens throughout America, in other words, people's confrontation with police on an individual basis, is very different. So if you go ahead and watch how, let's say, a white person is stopped by a police officer, and I know that's not the subject, but I think there's a lot that we're going to get out of this insurrection. When you see the timidity with which police officers, irrespective of the police officers' race, how they treat the other compared to how they treat the majority population, I think America for once got to see it in the aggregate with tens of thousands of people at once.
Exactly.
Joel, you're quiet.
You are. He is.
Well, I think this shows that MAGA launched its movement on its assault on the Capitol. I really think this is a day that'll live in infamy. But to the MAGA movement, this was a great success to them. And I think that the discussion that we have to have now is a very serious discussion about who are these people, how do we prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law, And then we have a crisis of who people believe in. I think the AM radio, these, Rush Limbaugh and these Fox News, the impact that they have had on American citizens is very, very, very adverse, because one of their narratives was that they're trying to stop communism and socialism. And I really think that they believe this. And until we start pushing back on AM radio and Fox News and lead boycotts of these radio stations who have these, right-wing talk shows, I think we're in big trouble. The second thing is, I think we have to introduce legislation to outlaw the KKK, white nationalist groups. We have to outlaw them because all they do is advocate violence, and they're organized to hate. And now they just tried to take over the Capitol. So they may look like buffoons, but they're not buffoons. I mean, people thought Hitler was a buffoon, right? He was a funny little man until he burned down the Reichstag with the Nazi party. But I think MAGA is here to stay. And we better start having conversations about who these people are. How do we begin to really reduce their influence within the Republican Party, within the country? They are not going away. And what Trump has done is what David Duke, the former Imperial Wizard of the KKK, and George Wallace couldn't do, Trump has done in 4 years. But I'm very concerned about MAGA. I think that if we don't have discussion about putting people to work at a good wage, these people are disaffected. A lot of them have high school educations. We're going to have to really think through how we get everyone to go to college. Bernie Sanders has talked about tuition-free college. Their demographic is white. Their demographic is high school educated, many of them from the rural areas and uninsured, unemployed. But we're going to have to go very, very deep into also voter suppression. The growth of MAGA is the growth of voter suppression too.
Now, I want to challenge you on one thing though, because based on what I said and based on what you're saying, because first of all, everything that you said there, I agree with 100%, right? But I want to personalize it a bit, Joel, because when you say all those things that you just said, which is true, right? I am not confronted by MAGA people on a daily basis.
Right.
I am not confronted by all these crazies on a daily basis. They come out of the corners, out of the roach slots, out of all these places, every so often. But I'm confronted by the police officers every time I go outside. And I'm not trying to change the discussion. I'm trying to say what was evident here is that we could see straight up that there is a difference in the way, in other words, our immediate problem, the MAGA problem I tell a lot of my progressive this, right? A lot of times the MAGA problem upset a lot of my white brothers and sisters more than it affects me, right? Because I live the MAGA experience, not only with MAGA people, but with some progressives themselves, some right-wingers themselves. But the police problem, the problem that we are able to see right out there, that I can't run away from, that I can't hide from, that once, and I can see it right, we got to see right out there that there is a different treatment, that it's a major problem that we should add to our repertoire of things that we're looking at.
What we have to, if those have been Black Lives Matter protesters, they would
they would have been dragged and beaten.
Right.
It would have been Tiananmen Square, like in China in 1989.
Right.
Karen and I worked on Capitol Hill, and I remember when I would walk into the security in the morning, they were some good old boy rednecks. I'm not going to even be pleasant about it. I'm not going to be politically correct. They were rednecks. We have police officers who took selfies with these terrorists. Then apparently they took the barricades down. But there has to be a congressional investigation from Homeland Security. They're going to have to hail in these Capitol police officers and ask them some very, very serious questions like, why didn't you do your job? And that's number one. Number two, there needs to be more Black and Latino police officers. Karen, you remember there weren't very many Black and Latino police officers that worked on Capitol Hill. But yeah, there's no doubt that the demarcation between melanin and people like me who are melanin challenged, you right? I'm severely melanin challenged. It was so apparent. But the question I'd like to ask both of you is, what did you think their goal was? What was the MAGA terrorist? What was their goal?
Well, I'm gonna start, if that's okay, and the answer is twofold. It's part A, part B. What was their goal? Their goal was to stop the certification of the vote so that Trump could retain power. However, because they're not terribly bright, and Trump is not terribly bright, they didn't have a plan. Rolling around yourself around in Nancy Pelosi's chair will not stop the certification of the vote. You can hang from the ceiling like Spider-Man, but that's not going to stop the certification of the vote. If they had a plan, the plan would have been, we're going to go in there and get those certificates, destroy them, and then at least we can slow down the certification of the vote. But they didn't seem to have a plan.
You know, Karen, you just hit the nail on the head, right? In other words, they, you know what I think all of this proves? I think this proves how easy it would have been if Trump had a modicum of intellect and the people that drove this thing had a modicum of intellect. I think that they would have succeeded. They would have succeeded because there are several things they could have done, right? They could have grabbed the boxes of all the ballots and burned them. They could have kidnapped a few and killed a few of our legislators, which would have helped, which would have meant we got new elections for those people who are missing, and maybe Trumpsters could get more of their people in because people would be scared to go out to vote now that the right wing shows that they can kill. I mean, there are all kinds of scenarios that I could see that most Americans would never have thought is possible in America. We showed how fragile our democracy is with a tyrant at the head of it. But here is the kicker. These guys were there simply because they wanted their country back. And I interviewed today Helen Lee Boyke. Okay, she runs a group called the reboot.org or the Reboot Foundation, where she's talking about fake news and critical thinking. And one of the things that she pointed out was these people are seeking something that's imaginary. In other words, they're looking at something that's never there. It's like what I've said, I think, in a few shows. They're looking for something or thinking that they want to get back something that they never really had, but that their masters, the plutocracy, made them believe people like the blacks, the Latinos are taken from them. And that's why I say you have to engage these guys to let them know, no, both of us are actually being screwed.
What are the blacks and Latinos taking away from white people?
Nothing, really.
I mean, I've heard this narrative, blacks and Latinos are taking away something from white people. So I know that the MAGA people believe that the immigrant population, that they had to build a wall that, didn't even.
Okay, but see, no, we're taking away the American dream. And I agree with Egberto. We're taking away, what they think they're fighting for was not and is not theirs.
Right.
They are not going to inherit some lifestyle, the American dream or whatever, on the basis of being white. I am white, therefore I'm going to make this amount of money. I'm going to live in this neighborhood and I will have this kind of lifestyle. You didn't, your father didn't, his father didn't, but in all that time, they haven't figured out that's not something that's going to be given to you.
But you know what, Karen? You know what is interesting? the master, I have this thing, and I have where I talk about we're all slaves. I always talk about our system is a new form of slavery, and it's very efficient, right? Because when I was a slave, I was property. When I was property, you had to feed, you had to maintain me, right? You had to
Right.
maintain your car. You had to feed me. You had to give me insurance. Well, not you had to give me health care. You had to give me clothes because I was your property and I had to keep chugging along and working. You're an employee now. I don't have to give you anything. If you can't do the job, bye-bye, and I don't lose any capital. And now the thing about it is, while it was only black folk that had to be looked at as capital, now nobody's looked at as capital, the people that is, which means the master no longer care about anybody. So even
Exactly.
so white people have become the new slave, the antiseptic slave. Black people have always been have transitioned into the same slavery that white people, the average white person that is, have always been. It's always been a small amount of people that controlled everything. And as long as they keep white person against black person against Chinese person against this, and that's why I said that is why when Joel talk about we have to figure out what's going on with MAGA. That's why I always say I'll give a MAGA guy a hug. Say, hey, brother, give the MAGA guy a hug, because I'm telling you, they are, it's not their fault. It's how they were conditioned.
Well, there's a manipulatocracy. And
Wait, say that again, Joel. Joel, you got to say that word again, dude.
The manipulatocracy. The manipulatocracy is Fox News, the AM radio, right-wing DJs. So when you wake up in the morning in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I live, and you turn on AM radio, all of a sudden you're hitting with a barrage of lies. Democrats are communist, they're socialist. Every member of Congress is a socialist because they're being paid by the government.
Right.
Karen and I, we used to be socialists because we used to work, right? We were socialists. But the one thing I want to raise too about race is the Electoral College is the most dangerous policy that we have, because as long as you have the Electoral College and the majority of the will of the people cannot be expressed at the ballot box, that gives rise to authoritarian dictators. A Donald Trump can get reelected again if we do not eliminate the Electoral College, which was founded by slave-owning states that were worried about the tyranny of the majority. What they were worried about were the heavily populated areas in the Northeast who could take away their slave-owning rights and their property by having this Electoral College. And if we don't start talking about getting rid of the Electoral College, I'm very involved in this right now. And the idea is to have, it's called the National Popular Vote. National Popular Vote movement is whatever state, whoever wins the popular vote running for president, the state's electors must go, to that person who won. I mean, what other, office is determined by an Electoral College? It's, first of all, it's very confusing. We're not a democracy. We are an electoral democracy. And as long as we are an electoral democracy, we're a quasi-democracy. A Donald Trump can emanate out of nowhere again and get elected, but no one is bringing up in the press the danger of the Electoral College, which is how Trump got into office. It's how George W. Bush got into office. And then gerrymandering.
But wait, let me cut you off right there.
Okay.
I like everything you say, and I agree with everything you say. But there's one thing that has been overlooked, and that is Trump is an imbecile. Okay. And he got a bunch of little
What
idiots.
makes you say that, Karen? Aren't you being overly critical?
Wait, hear me out. He got a bunch of idiot minions who follow him. And look at what they almost accomplished. So if you actually got somebody with a brain in there and maybe some little minions that could reason, I mean, because we're talking about some really stupid people. Here's some folks running around in the house and not in a group of 100 people couldn't figure out that the way to stop the certification of the vote is to make off with the certificates. I mean,
You mean like
100 people.
Ted Cruz? You mean like Ted Cruz?
But you know what is also funny?
Ted Cruz.
You're right. The other thing is, what's funny is not only that, to take pictures doing something illegal and post
I know, and post them to, yeah. That's what I'm saying. You know, he's an idiot. But my point is, what we need to do is look at the democracy, not just the electoral Congress, but all of it. That here's a man who is an imbecile who came in and said, I'm gonna rip apart the State Department. I'm getting ready to destroy
and he did it.
And he did it. I mean, he like ripped out all the people. I'm gonna install people who are dumb as I am so I can get whatever I want done. I'm gonna put Barr at the top of it because he's gonna do whatever I say. He's gonna be my personal attorney. I'm going to disseminate all of these institutions, and then was able to do it. So we need to look at how do we protect our democracy, because every time we've had this kind of a crisis, every time it gets worse. Now, Bush, everybody thought he was horrible till they met Trump. Now, just imagine somebody worse than Trump, who's smart.
Well, you know, it seems like the Republican, though, they work inversely from others. You know, we kind of get smart people and they kind of get somebody a little bit dumber each time. Because again, when we got Reagan, no, well, actually, that's not completely true. Reagan was pretty dumb. He just had good people. But then you got Bush 2, Bush 1, which Bush 1 is a pretty smart guy, but his son didn't have a lot upstairs. And then we got Trump. Interesting.
And that's what I'm saying. And but see, the problem, the reason I don't think it's so much that they intend to get dumb people, but you're asking someone to stand up and say what you've never had the courage to say, because you understand the political ramifications of that. So well, here's the irony of it. How do you find someone dumb enough to stand up and say, you know, we're going to ban all the Muslims, we're going to send all African folks back to Africa, we're going to send all the Mexican people back over to Mexico? You need somebody dumb enough to say this publicly and still be able to achieve what you want. So you're going to end up with somebody a little like on Trump. The stupid side. Yeah.
Karen, Egberto, Donald Trump got the second most votes in the history of our nation.
Imagine that.
Al Gore in 2000 got the most votes ever for anyone running for president. He lost. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. She never became the president. So, you know, was it Forrest Gump who said stupid is as stupid does? So you've got a guy who ran for office, and here was his platform. I'm going to build a wall and keep rapists out from Mexico. I'm going to ban Muslims. And then he ruined the economy. He could not handle COVID-19. And was it 75 million people or 74 million people voted for Trump? Egberto?
74.
All right.
81
here's why I'm frightened about the future of America and MAGA. I posit if COVID-19 pandemic had never happened and the economy was good, Trump would have been reelected.
You're absolutely right.
Which led.
Well, I'm gonna say I would submit to you that even if the economy was in the toilet and we were dying of COVID-19, if he had just pretended to care, he'd still be president.
You know, actually, Karen, you're right as well. Yes.
I agree with you. But here's what's scary to me. What's scary to me is when I've talked to people in my sister's apartment complex and I say, why did you vote for Trump? Because I believe he cares about me. Mm-hmm. And there was a great economy going on. I said, no, he inherited the Obama economy. Right. But the fact that this guy with no accomplishments gets 75 million votes, then I have to ask the next question. What happens in 2 years during the midterms? Because typically what happens is you get a Democratic president, Democrats start running as Republicans, and then we lose the House, and then the Democratic president can't get anything passed. I think we have to take the Georgia model of getting these two senators elected who are Democrats and Biden and replicate it in every swing state. And if we don't do that, we're in bad shape. And number two, Democrats better start running as populists, or they're gonna flip the Congress, because most people don't even know what a Democrat even stands for. And I think
well, including the Democrats.
Yeah. What's that?
Including the Democrats.
Even Democrats don't know what Democrats stand for.
No, they don't know what they stand for. And so they run as moderate Republicans. Blacks and brown people and students go, I don't want to vote for you because I can't pay my bills. I can't go to college. I can't get health care. You're not talking about that. I can't go to college. I'm worried about climate change. But the larger question, I think, is how do we replicate the Georgia model in the swing states? That is something that I'm working on right now, forming a coalition of conscience to create a new 21st century election protection, get out the vote movement, where there is a foundation that funds the Stacey Abrams all across the country. And we introduce legislation in Congress that's progressive. So when Democrats run, they're running on legislation that's going to touch people's lives. And the Democratic Party is not going to do that on their own. We're going to have to make them do it.
I think that if you take a look at what Stacey Abrams did, that is what she did. She just disassociated herself from the Democratic Party. She formed an organization, did what she needed to get done, brought in people as allies, and brought in. I don't remember all the names of the groups. I forgot all the names right now, but I mean, brought in a whole lot of good people and got the job done. And I think you're right. We can replicate that all over. Now, the one thing you're also right that we have to become populist, because especially after the dire straits that Americans are in right now, we're going to have to become populist. I think we only have about a couple of minutes left in our time schedule here. So what's our goal? What's our give off for today? What can we tell people to go ahead and do to actually make a difference? Karen, what do we need to do?
I think we need to, well, first of all, we need to call out, just like COVID exposed all the inequities in healthcare, this March on Washington exposed white privilege in the face of law enforcement. I mean, they were scaling walls and carrying on. If it had been me, I'd have been dragged out by the neck and hung on one of those ropes. So we need to call that out, because that was clearly, that was white privilege at work. I'm white, I'm going to tear up.
You know what is good I'm glad you said that, because I think when I saw a few of the white hosts on TV, for them, they saw it right away, and that they articulated it without any, I mean, they actually articulated that this is what is occurring. And it was great seeing them do that, because they try to sugarcoat this stuff a whole lot of times. I can tell you that if you watched MSNBC or CNN, it was not sugarcoated at all.
I agree. I mean, I think, well, Karen, you were raising the concept of stupidity and
not having lack of a plan.
I have to tell you, now people aren't going to like what I'm about to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think we have to look at ignorance and stupidity among the progressive movement, and I'll tell you why. I think the last 6 elections out of 7, Democrats have won the popular vote for presidency. There are more progressive and more Democrats in this country than there are right-wing Republicans. The Black Lives Matter movement is what the future of America is going to look like. We had blacks, Latinos, progressive whites fighting for criminal justice reform. The question is, how does the majority that keeps winning over and over again presidential elections to vote Democrat, why are we fragmented? Why are we in all these silos? It's real simple what we got to do. We have to create one progressive rainbow coalition that has a lot of money. We got to run our own people for office. We have to fight back together as a extended family. We did this with the universal healthcare movement under Mr. Conyers' leadership. And until the progressive movement begins to have a conversation with itself, how can we now be in the majority, but then be in the minority in terms of winning and losing General Assembly seats? If we don't have that, and that's what I'm hoping this show will do.
Okay, but we don't have a plan. Just like those folks ran up in the White House or whatever and tear up stuff and carry on and didn't have a plan. We don't have a plan.
I like what he's. I like what he's saying. So I like what he's saying. So I'm saying now, okay, our next show, Joel. I think you've articulated that problem perfectly. Let's have the next show where we actually start talking about enumerated solutions to do that, because I think that'll hold up pretty tight. But I think you've seen the problem a lot. We are is it segmented? Is it segmented? The word?
Segmented. We're fragmented.
Fragmented. That's the word I'm looking for.
Very poor leaders, ego, the nonprofit industrial complex.
Right.
The growing demographic in 2045, our nation is going to be majority minority. The only reason why we don't have a progressive legislative agenda, why we're not dominating electoral races, is because we have very, very, in my opinion, poor leaders. We got to have more leaders of color in the progressive movement. We need more Black women and more brown women and more Black and brown men to be in the leadership. The progressive movement has been dominated by people who look like me, not as good looking as me. No, I'm kidding. They have no sense of humor either, and they're not very funky. They're kind of boring.
And you know what? They can't play a hell of a bass like you either.
Man, they can't touch me on the bass. And but I mean, I would like to see Karen Morgan. I'd like to see Egberto. I'd like to see people like you both in leadership. And I will just say that as an architect of the Progressive Democrats of America and the Universal Healthcare Movement, we have proven, Karen, am I right? We have proven time and time again throughout history that Martin King being the best example, I think, and Mahatma Gandhi be another example, and Mandela, what do Mandela and Gandhi have in common? One was Black and one was brown. Why don't we study Black and brown history more and say, Mandela got rid of the apartheid government. Gandhi pushed out the British. What did they have? One had the Indian National Congress, the other had the African National Congress. Can we not like be somewhat smart for a second and replicate Black and brown leaders and Black and brown history and study it and replicate it? It's already in front of us. Coors Aquino did it in the Philippines too.
With that, Joel, since I am the timekeeper, I'm going to ask the best looking person on the show to bring us home.
Karen?
Okay, well, I want to thank you for hanging out with us for an hour. And I invite you to join us again on A Deeper Look next week.